about 1 in 20 of people who have psychosis commit suicide. So there is a quite high rate of death. About 50% of people with psychosis might harm themselves over their lifetime. About 18% try to commit suicide, and about 5% do commit suicide. That is the reality. Self-harm and suicide is a much more serious problem than people with psychosis being dangerous to other people. Hello, I'm PhilippaGarety. I'm Professor of Clinical Psychology at King's College London, and I work as a consultant clinical psychologist, working to try to understand what causes psychosis and find new ways of providing help, new psychological treatments. It's a really common myth that psychosis causes people to be violent. For the vast majority of people who experience psychosis, that's not the case. In fact, they're much more likely to become the victims of attacks than people who cause violence themselves. So that's really important to say. Psychosis is frightening, and people often avoid other people. There are rare cases where people, in the midst of feeling very terrified by their psychosis, are involved in some violence. It's only maybe less than 4% of cases where people with psychosis may be involved in acts of violence. But they're often associated with the other things which are associated with violence in the world, like taking drugs or being in areas with lots of crime. So other factors need taking into account, not just the psychosis. Generally speaking, psychosis isn't dangerous. The danger that psychosis is much more importantly associated with is self-harm, harming the self. Because people feel under attack by their voices or by their paranoid thoughts or by feeling confused by what's going on around them, they are more likely to feel hopeless if they can't get away from these experiences. And so maybe half of the people who experience psychosis over the longer term may take some medication or something to blank out the experiences, or take drugs to get rid of the experiences, so involve themselves in some self-harm. It's a very, very sad but important feature to recognise that some people try to commit suicide. Perhaps 18% of people with longer term psychosis, and some people very sadly succeed in committing suicide. Maybe 1 in 20 people who've had a diagnosis longer term may end up taking their own lives. So that's why it's so important we help people try to help overcome the hopelessness that may go with untreated psychosis. We used not to think that, and it was said that there was a strong inherited component of psychosis, but recent research in the last 10 to 20 years has really consistently and convincingly demonstrated that people who have severe adversity in childhood, forms of trauma, whether it's neglect or emotional abuse or sexual abuse or physical abuse, are much more likely to experience psychosis than other people in the population. So it's what we call a risk factor. You don't have to have had experiences of abuse in childhood to have psychotic experiences, not at all. There are people who haven't, but it is a risk factor along with other risk factors. Some of the risk factors are inherited. You're more likely to have psychosis if you have a relative with psychosis, so it shows it's partly inherited, but it's also partly to do with your life experiences. It doesn't have to be just childhood trauma. So people seem to develop psychosis when they move into adulthood. So the most common age at which psychosis starts is in your early 20s. And that's at a time when you're often making a transition away from a supported childhood period into adulthood. And it can be quite stressful managing life, managing work, managing new relationships, managing the sort of demands of becoming an adult. And it seems like those stresses are part of what triggers the feelings that come along with psychosis. No. I should say, because I didn't say this in the earlier bit, you can have psychotic experiences without them being a problem for you. That's really important to say. So you can hear voices and feel that they're okay, that they're not causing you any problem, and sometimes they're even comforting. It's not unusual when people have been bereaved that they may for a time hear the voice of the person they loved who's died, and people can be quite comforted by that. So that's one way in which you shouldn't worry if you have some experiences like that. And we all feel a bit paranoid sometimes. We all might have reason to worry about whether people want the best for us, and we can manage those feelings, and we may feel a bit worse when we're in situations where we don't know many people, and so we might feel more anxious about how people are treating us. But that's not a problem if we recognise that's what's going on. So it's only when it's a really persistent problem that we think of it as to do with having poor mental health. In those circumstances, the question was, is it permanent? No. There are people who can have periods where it's having psychotic experiences and they go away again. Life gets better, they're more supported, and they feel better, or they get treatment and help and it gets better. People who have psychotic experiences often feel anxious, and they may also become rather depressed or hopeless if they feel they can't understand what's happening to them and they can't find help. They may feel rather overwhelmed. It is the case that psychosis can be accompanied by what we call emotional disorders, feeling anxious and depressed. Psychosis occurs in a variety of different mental health diagnoses as well. So the most common is a diagnosis called schizophrenia, but also bipolar disorder, which has psychosis alongside very big changes in mood, and sometimes the thoughts and experiences in bipolar disorder are slightly different, more to do with not so much feeling persecuted as feeling very special, when the mood is very elated, when the person has a high, and so people may have ideas of grandiosity, we call it, feeling very special, and that's associated with the mood changing into a high. Well, many people will be offered medication if they have distressing and persistent psychotic experiences and beliefs, and there's groups of medication that are directed especially at helping people with psychosis, which are generally helpful, and the majority of people will benefit from. At the same time, we aim now to offer people psychological or talking therapies, because it's really important that people are able to understand what's happening, because at the heart of psychosis is a change in your experience of your thoughts and feelings, and to work with somebody who will listen to what's happening in your head and help you to make sense of it and see if there are ways of thinking and feeling and behaving which would be in the long run more helpful is crucial. So that's what the talking therapies do to help people with the psychotic experiences. The important thing is if you're feeling frightened and confused and having experiences which other people aren't recognizing as true, then it's good to get help. It's best not to worry on your own, because then you won't probably find the solution. It's good to reach out to friends and family, and if they can't help, to mental health professionals via your GP, because there are professionals who understand what's happening, understand the factors which might be contributing and triggering these experiences, and have treatments which are helpful.